Like, what if all the boys in town were connected by like a magic that came on through puberty? And like their nocturnal emissions and stuff were all as mythologized as like the women's circle gets.
Suddenly, in the middle of the night, Rand, Matt, and Perrin all awake at the same time, going, "Ugh!" They look at each other like, "Did you just? Oh my god!" Hello, and welcome to the Bridge Burners Book Club, where together we read, discuss, criticize, and get excited about all things fantasy. I'm your host, Sean, and with me is my co-host, Tyler.
That's me.
And our co-host, Ben.
A dragon? Oh, shit. I just pissed myself.
We're excited to have you along with us each week as we take a journey together through the books we love. Stamp it, sign it, seal it, send it. That's what I always say, because I write actual letters and send them in the mail.
When was the last time you willingly sent a letter, Sean?
Well, see, you say willingly, and like the very first thing I thought was being in school and having to write a fucking like pen pal letter to someone in France or something like that. That wasn't willing.
Or to a soldier. We're probably too old to write letters to soldiers, but I know that did happen quite a bit.
I did for Desert Storm, I think. That was
What?
It was like kindergarten for me, yeah.
I'm so fantasy brained that I just immediately thought of that as writing a letter to a soldier like, "Dearest George, how goes things on the front lines?"
It was more like, yeah, "Hi, soldier. I hope you don't die." That's probably all I probably was really capable of at the age. Yeah.
Don't forget to send some scalps back home.
Oh, God.
I'm reading Blood Meridian.
Okay. Yeah.
What a brutal fucking book.
Yeah, for real.
More brutal than anything I've read in a long time.
Also, Cormac McCarthy, did you read The Road?
I haven't read The Road, seen it. I've only read 3. This is the 3rd book I've read. I read No Country for Old Men and All the Pretty Horses. But Blood Meridian is just a murder fest. Yeah, just a little like road trip of murder.
Yeah, I would say that Blood Meridian is probably a little more disturbing than The Road, but that's not that big of a gap there between the two. They're both pretty bad.
I started to read Child of God, which that one I think is probably it's just worse, I think. I don't know. It's about a guy who lives alone in the woods and then has sex with dead people and kidnaps a lady and does all sorts of horrible things. Yeah, that one's messed up.
I keep waiting for cannibalism in Blood Meridian. It's like, they're going to eat somebody. They haven't yet.
Come on, guys. You know you gotta.
You're going to eat somebody.
You're gonna do it, guys.
You sure look hungry. I mean, they make like belts and shit, articles of clothing from human skin, but no eating. That's good. I mean, I guess they got that going for them.
Yeah, I just Googled the plot of Child of God, and yeah, sounds fun. Sounds like a good, wholesome story about a serial killer. I love this name, though, Lester Ballard. That's the most southern, fucked up serial killer name I've ever heard.
I mean, Cormac McCarthy in and of himself is a fantastic name, and he has a good, I think, eye for memorable names.
There was a good name, one of the better fantasy names, I think, so far, in these chapters we read this week. Is it like the Tree of Life or whatever?
Yes.
Vendesora.
I really liked these 3 chapters. I think they kind of went well together. Should drop that in there now.
Yeah, we finally got into some action. Felt like Robert Jordan upped his prose game in these chapters. It definitely started to feel like he was finding himself with the kind of things he really enjoys writing.
Yeah, less teenagers being teenagers and more classic fantasy adventure stuff. So cool, let's get into it.
Yeah, but before that, do have a short little discussion I'd like to have here. I got a question for you guys. What are the elements that make a story fall into the category of fantasy, in your opinion? It brings up some questions to me about the genreized thing that we think of as fantasy that usually involves magic, swords and sorcery, usually a medieval setting in my head. But also, when you really think about it, it expands into all sorts of other things. You know, the kind of thing that maybe Neil Gaiman writes or H.P. Lovecraft, horror things, and even some stuff that we might consider to sort of be sci-fi or a cross between the two. Yeah, what did you guys think when you thought about that?
What I was thinking is it's a story that has some element of supernatural, like something in the world itself that is supernatural to the people that live there. Like that's where I think you can kind of draw the line. You even have like science fiction slash fantasy. Like Star Wars is sci-fi fantasy because it's like science fiction with like spaceships and stuff, but it also is fantasy in that there's this thing called the Force that is supernatural even in that world. Anything with a supernatural element can be fantasy, like, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and the Fall of the House of Usher and all that stuff in the Telltale Heart can be fantasy. That's my take.
It usually involves a made-up world, but it doesn't even have to necessarily involve a completely made-up world. Sometimes it's a mix between.
Yeah, like Harry Potter is fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's England, but supernatural England. What do you think, Benzo?
Well, I wrote this down in a tagline form and probably way overly simplistic, but I wrote sci-fi, what could be, fantasy, what can't be. And expanding on that, sci-fi is, in general, the expansion of our knowledge about technology, the natural world, the cosmos, and what, maybe 1,000, 10,000, a million years down the road could be possible with, advances in technology and exploration. Fantasy is a logical assessment of our natural world and saying these things can't happen, magic. Based on our observations, it's very unlikely this is possible. And that is a very boring way to summarize them and completely, at least on the fantasy side, destroys imagination and exploring the world and the adventurous mind. But I think that's kind of a way to distinguish sci-fi and fantasy because they blend so much. And like you said, like Star Wars is the classic melding of those two genres.
I probably like sci-fi and fantasy almost equally, but there is something almost special to me about fantasy in the way that, like you're saying, it's things that you have to completely imagine almost out of thin air that would never exist in a world outside of the imagination. Whereas usually in sci-fi, you're thinking of stuff that sort of expands on technology that we already have or has already been thought of as a potential thing that could exist in the future. And it sort of makes sense if you extrapolate it out from what we know today. But fantasy is like, to me, there's always stories that can be written that will be completely unique. Starting out a whole new book or series, new author, new point of view, maybe from a different part of the world than you're used to reading from, can open up a whole new world. Usually these things are drawn from pre-existing mythology in some ways or stories. I feel like it connects into both the past and an imaginary world in a pretty unique way.
So I just kind of thought of this like test case, just kind of a scenario that ponders this question. If you took a non-magical medieval story, so it's knights, horses, damsels, kings, jesters, whatever, and you put it on a habitable form of Mars, so there's trees and, that you can breathe the air, everything like that, is that fantasy or is that sci-fi?
I would say that's sci-fi. There's a book called, I think it's like A Memory of Earth or something. There's this planet that's far away. It's humans like civilized it. Humans colonized it, or settled there. And it's really basically just like this guy's living his life on this planet. There's like a lot of drama around that. And then eventually he realizes, oh, I can go up to this satellite. I would say, yeah, that's like a sci-fi book. I would say there's nothing supernatural and it's just like humans living on another planet.
I have to ask, because I just Googled Memory of Earth. You're not talking about Orson Scott Card, are you?
I am talking about Orson Scott Card. Yeah. I'm not super proud of having read that one.
Let me read what popped up when I typed that in. The Memory of Earth, 1992, is a science fiction novel by American writer Orson Scott Card. It is the first book of the Homecoming Saga, a loose fictionalization of the first few hundred years recorded in the Book of Mormon.
Oh.
I have to read this book.
So I didn't read any of the further books in the series, but I can see where that would go.
One of us.
Orson Scott Card's an interesting fella.
I grew up as a Mormon, so I have a particular interest in finding out how this lines up with the actual Book of Mormon. Have you guys ever hate read a book? Do you ever read anything, maybe just because you started it?
Only the first couple chapters of Dianetics, but I couldn't get much further than that.
I've skimmed the Book of Mormon, and then like 10 years ago, I got drunk and I read the Bible. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Being a person that grew up on that.
Yeah, oh man, the Old Testament, that shit's crazy. As an aside, I just remember this talking about H.P. Lovecraft. Have you guys ever read any H.P. Lovecraft stuff?
Yes. And the stuff that's not really racist is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's good writing. Kind of get you. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. I mean, he sort of started a whole genre of this weird horror fiction stuff that still carries through till today. I even enjoy reading, stories that are carrying on the mythos that he created back then today.
There's a lot of short fiction out there that I've read that's pretty good. That's like famous authors doing a little bit of Lovecrafty stuff. Ben, what would you classify between horror, fantasy, and science fiction? What is The Tommyknockers by Stephen King?
Oh boy. That's actually one of the few books from that era I did not read.
That sounds like a made up name.
All the machines go crazy in town with the green light.
I don't think I read that one.
Stephen King was like, what do I name this book? What do I name this book? He just took a big old snort of Coke and then went, The Tommyknockers.
This one is actually, I think, legitimately him dealing with some addiction. There's this lady in her house going crazy, and then the whole town kind of does the same thing because of, spoiler alert, there's a spaceship buried underneath her house.
It's me, Tommy. I've been knocking here.
I've been knocking down here.
It sounds like another thing, like there's that word knickerbockers. I feel like Tommy Knockers is something similar.
Yeah.
They mention it in the book. It's the ghosts of World War I soldiers who are like trapped in trenches. That doesn't have anything to do with the book though, so fuck you, Stephen King. No, don't fuck you, Stephen King. You're a lovely man.
I haven't read that much Stephen King. I read The Stand and I read the first Dark Tower.
The Dark Tower, is that fantasy or sci-fi or horror? I think that's fantasy.
I thought it was uninteresting. That's what I thought about it. But I know it's supposed to be good. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you have to get a ways into it. The first book is a lot different in tone and style than the rest of it.
It's like when you get told about a show that's really good and it's on like its fourth season. And someone's like, you just got to get through that first season. It's not that good, but it really finds its legs in the second.
You're like, how much fucking time do you think I have to sit through a bad season of a show? Ugh.
At this point, it's like, if the first episode isn't good, I'm done.
Does The Expanse get good? Because I was kind of like that with the first episode.
Yes, it does.
I love The Expanse.
Probably should watch that, yeah.
That's the exception.
I've read all the books and shit though, but I thought the show was one of the better sci-fi shows ever, probably.
Yeah.
You a Battlestar Galactica fan, Sean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know how I'd feel today, especially that, I mean, I knew this when I watched it before, but speaking of Mormonism, it's another Mormonism thing, but, Mormonism is a made-up story too, so what can I say?
You said it, not me. You said it.
I believe, if I remember right, it was the original Battlestar Galactica show that was actually fully taken from Mormonism, and then, the new show was more or less an extrapolation from that. So it's by degrees, and for example, what is it in the show? Is it a Kobol or Kolob?
The Words of Kobol.
Okay, because Kolob is the Mormon planet that supposedly God lives on somewhere out in space, and then Kobol is the one from Battlestar. So it's not that far removed.
It's not every day I learn something new about Battlestar Galactica. Thank you, Sean.
Amazing.
Well, we have a Battlestar Galactica podcast on our hands here.
More Battlestar Galactica facts coming to you in the next episode.
What will make us more money?
Probably the BSG one.
Neither.
What was the John Travolta Scientology?
Battlefield Earth.
Maybe we should just switch this to a Mormon fiction-themed podcast.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Please don't make me read the Book of Mormon. No, go. No.
That would be hilarious to actually do it on this show as just a regular fantasy book. We're reading the Book of Mormon now.
A serious commitment.
Joseph Smith was kind of a boring writer. Anyways, we should probably get into talking about Wheel of Time here. So let's get it started with today's first chapter summary.
Chapter 4, The Gleeman. Matt, Rand, Egwin, and Perrin meet the visiting Gleeman, Tom Maryland. He mocks the young Emmonsfielder's naivety for several minutes before they manage to catch on, but is able to easily win back the favor of the group by mentioning a few stories and juggling a few balls. Tom seems to be wary of Paden Fane as well as Moraine and Lan. The mounting list of dangers besetting the two rivers reaches a head and tempers boil over between the town council and the women's circle. Mayor Elvira announces that in the coming days, volunteer patrols will be formed to monitor the local borders for outsiders. Tam is on high alert and decides to end the day in Emmonsfield early, much to Rand's disappointment. As they leave town, Tam explains that he has learned that several other boys have spotted the dark-clothed rider.
Let's get into chapter 4. It's called The Gleeman. It is mostly about the Gleeman, I guess, but not really.
Yeah, he kind of just buggers off about a third of the way through this chapter, which is kind of funny.
Tom Maryland reminds me of when we go to the Ren Fair. I just remember seeing the guy doing the Punch and Judy show, and he's like super tan and like sunburned. He's like 50, probably 55 years old, and just looks so hungover, but he's like committing completely to the puppet show. It's like, this dude is totally worn out, but he can't do anything but this. This is his life.
This is his second show, and he got 2 more to go, and he's still giving it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Ren Fair circuit seems like interesting people.
Yeah. They're gleemen.
They're all gleemen, and this is what they do. It's interesting to think about people in medieval times or at any point in history, really, whose job was just to go around and entertain. Talking about the Homeric people who had to memorize several thousand lines of poetry, and you wouldn't say it all at once, but you'd have to be able to call it up for a party or whatever.
You don't have a W-2 in medieval times or pre-medieval times. You don't have a 401k.
Your entire resume as this traveling entertainer is just exactly what happens in this story. He's mocking Rand, Perrin, Matt, and Egwene for their naivety and kind of probing them about what stories they like and how far they've gone from Emond's Field and things like that. And then they sort of realize that he's mocking them after a minute, and they get a little angry about it and they start talking back to him. But all it takes is he suddenly does like a backwards somersault, leaps up onto the ridge of the foundation of the inn, and then starts juggling a few balls, and the whole town is just like, oh, and even the people he was just mocking are suddenly like, okay, he is pretty cool though. I kind of like him.
He said something interesting in his little bit before he gets into like talking about how big Rand is, where he's talking about the news in the world and intimating that they're all kind of dumb about it. And they're like, Paddon Fane, there's more Raven in him than man. And I really like that because from what I remember later in the story, Paddon Fane has a lot of dark characteristics to him that kind of mark him out. And I think that's an interesting call out to come this early with how Ravens have been put into it so far. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're pretty much told that Ravens are not a good thing, apparently, at least in Two Rivers. They're very wary of them. And in the same way, Tom Marilyn is extremely wary of Paddon Fane, and also doesn't seem to be a fan of Moiraine when he sees her.
He is a big fan of how big that Rand is. And my favorite, measures him in axe handles. Says you're an axe handle across the shoulder and as tall as an Ailman.
And he names so many like epic fables like Jane Fairstrider and all that stuff, which will become relevant down the road. But my favorite is how Goodwife Carol cured her husband of snoring.
I know. He drops 3 Arthurs. It's not Arthur, it's Arthur. He's like, there's the story of Arthur, and the other Arthur.
I think those are all the same Archer and Arthur Pendragon, which is clear. That's Arthur, King Arthur.
Kind of sounds like he's just dropping King Arthur.
Pendragon was his family name, and then Tanriel, I think, was where he was born in Cornwall. So I think that's where those 3 words came from.
For a minute, I was imagining it just like what they would do today. I don't think they're going to do this in the Wheel of Time show, but wouldn't surprise me in today's world if they just did a thing where it's like, oh, it's all part of the multiverse now. And one of the past turnings of the wheel, that was when the King Arthur world was just the real world. And you get some stupid flashback where all of a sudden their worlds are connected for a moment, and King Arthur and Merlin are just looking at Rand and company. I would hate it. I would hate it so much. The first thing that Tom Marilyn does when he starts talking to these teenagers, he talks about Nynaeve, and he's like, that pretty little slip of a girl, a village wisdom? Why, at her age, she should better be flirting with the young men than foretelling the weather and curing the sick. Okay, buddy, that's a little weird. And then he's asking Egwene to what does he say? Hand me my flute when I want it, and other apparatus. I always choose the prettiest girl I can find as my assistant. Calm down, man. He's describing how thick and broad-shouldered Rand is.
He's horny, but he probably has like a stock. Find the handsome lad, find the pretty girl, and get to work in every town that he gets to.
True. That's a good counter. I'll buy that.
Yeah, but also he could be traveling town to town molesting teenagers.
In my memory, I could be wrong, but I don't think Tom Marilyn fucks Egwene or Rand.
I've just said in the real world, I'd keep an eye on this guy around my teenagers if I had any.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
I mean, just based on what we know about carnies and our experiences, this is a Robert Jordan world. No one fucks at all.
Yeah, no one gropes any teenagers in Robert Jordan's world.
We get a little further in the chapter here. We get to where Nynaeve emerges from the inn after meeting with the town council, and it seems like they're kind of talking about the list of bad things that are happening around Emmons Field. Probably the Dark Rider and all the stuff that Ken Bowie's complaining about, failing crops and whatever. And then now they've been told by Pat and Fane that there's a potential war breaking out and a false dragon and all that.
Nynaeve is the thing that she's pissed off at. And she's calling everybody harebrained idiots or called them a fool in front of the council and said that no one has a full set of wits among them. But she's concerned about Moraine and Lan. That's what she's pissed about. Like, the only person that seems to actually care about the real problems in town is Ken Bowie. But Nynaeve just wants to kick Moraine and Lan out of the inn. Unless I'm like misreading this, that's the main thing that she seems concerned about, which seems a little hilarious and petty.
They can all put up with the town curmudgeons, but any outsiders, no thank you.
It's kind of cute. Also, in the middle of this scene, breaks into Rand's worried about, oh, Egwin's going to leave. He seems to be processing still like what just happened in the last chapter with Egwin kind of saying like, I want to get out of this town. And he's like, but wait, no.
Yeah. To pick up on something we had talked about in the last episode, they're talking after Nynaeve comes out here, and I'll just read this. Egwene looked at Rand as if she were going to speak, then darted after the wisdom instead. Rand knew there must be some way to stop her from leaving the two rivers, but the only way he could think of was not one he was prepared to take, even if she was willing. And she had as much as said she was not willing at all, which made him feel even worse. Follow that up with Ken Bowie just saying, that young woman wants a husband. Clearly, that's where Rand gets it from the townspeople. There's this kind of patriarchal, sexist thing going on here where Rand seems to feel as if it's okay for him to daydream about going on adventures and whatnot and leaving the village. But the idea that Egwene is even thinking about leaving the two rivers is like offensive to him. And he's trying to figure out how he would make sure she can never do that. And he's like, well, I'm not willing to marry her, though. Come on. You know, nothing's spelled out, which I think is good. Seems like in the writing, he's kind of trying to hint that Rand has these immature feelings about women, and we'll see how that evolves as it goes on, if he gets smarter about that, or probably will make a bunch of mistakes, I'm assuming.
So they go to leave town because Tam says, hey, we're leaving. And Rand says, I thought we were staying for winter night, but where were they staying?
At the end, probably.
There's only a couple rooms at the inn, and now there's 4 guests at the inn. So, I mean...
Well, Tam doesn't want to get married against his will, so he's got to get out of there.
I know that's true. If he falls asleep in town, who knows who he'll wake up with, and then he'll be married.
Probably shacking up at Ken Bowie's bachelor pad, I assume.
Man, that place has got, like, what does Ken Bowie's place smell like?
Oh, God. Trollocs.
He's a Thatcher, though, so he's got some nice roofing. Speaking of which, should we break for an ad break?
Yeah. We got our first sponsor for this episode already in episode 3. Let's go to that now.
Finding yourself unable to enjoy a hearty bowl of beet porridge after a hard day in your meager fields with that late winter's wind tickling your undercarriage? Is the drip, drip, drip pitter-pattering on your pate when your good wife needs you to perform your husbandly duties, keeping you down when you need to be up? Your crops are coming in late. Wolves are eating your sheep. And like all strong Emmons Field men, your family depends on you. But can you depend on the strength of your thatch? Let Ken Bowie take a load off your cart. Using nothing more than a team of oxen, our patent-pending reverse plow projection technology, and a madly touch of magic, you'll have the weather off your back and a roof over your head within mere moments. With just 3 easy payments of 30 coppers, the rain, snow, and even the woman's circle will feel like distant memories from a past life.
Don't be aloof. Fix your roof with Ken Bowie's Thatch Blaster 3000. Use promo code HONEYCAKES at checkout to get 20% off today. And remember, never trust a Terran ferryman.
Ken Bowie's Thatch Blaster services are covered by a limited warranty for 1 winter and 1 winter only. Terms and conditions may apply. In the increasingly likely event of Trolloc attacks, Aes Sedai witchery, or the return of the dragon and the breaking of the world, Ken Bowie accepts no responsibility for damages sustained. End of the chapter here. Rand is being ushered out of town quickly by Tam, who has just got out of the meeting with the town council. Sounds like they sort of decided on some things. He announces that they're going to form these little militia patrol things to go watch the borders of the Two Rivers area to make sure that no outsiders are coming in.
And I just want to say that's a great I really just liked his anarcho-collectivist organizing that they did really quickly. Like, hey, our community's in danger. Bada bing, bada boom. He's a kind of organized guy. He kind of has the shit together. He just like, here's what's going on. Here's what we're going to do. And everyone's like, okay. Which is, I mean, maybe a little idealistic.
It just starts to tell you why the town regards Tam as such like a strong voice for leading the village, that he seems to have a very good sense in these chapters of what to do when danger approaches for real. And he's level-headed about it. He takes some time to sort of consider things. Hears that Rand sees this dark rider, but then at the end of the chapter here, he tells Rand that he talked to the other fathers around town and their kids are all having these sightings of a black rider that sound the same. And he's taking it seriously, and it's comforting to Rand. I did like this moment when they go to the stables to get Bella, to hook up to their cart and head out of town. Rand goes into the stable and sees Paddon Fane's 8 horses and the horses belonging to Moraine and Lan, Tom Maryland maybe too. But he's like looking at each of these and he thinks that they fit. He's like, and the third unfamiliar horse, a rangy, slab-sided gelding of a dusty brown, fit Tom Maryland perfectly. He like describes how each of these horses fit their riders perfectly. And I like that characterization of Rand as like a farm kid where he's
matching the man to the horse.
Yeah, he like doesn't know that they're horses. He's just seeing them, but he knows automatically which one belongs to who.
I love the picture in my mind of like seeing Lan leave town on a tiny little white pony. Like, what if like, oh shit, he comes back later and everyone's riding the wrong horse and Moraine's on the giant one.
And I had a question here. It describes that Rand, he's walking down the road out of town. He's kind of feeling tense and he pulls back on the bowstring and he's only able to hold it, not that long before it starts to get too hard to hold. And he says he's one of the few people in town that are even able to draw it all the way to the cheek. And have you guys ever actually shot real bows?
Yeah, like just a couple of times. Most recently at a Ren fair, now that we're getting back to Ren fair talk. Yeah, and I had a friend who was kind of into archery as a kid, and we would do stuff. Yeah, it's hard, man. And you have to get the right kind of bow to be tensioned for your strength. And I've heard like English longbows in the old days were like super hard to pull. Yeah, like you can see muscle wear on people who do it repetitively.
Yeah, Ren fair and summer camp. I had actually 3 friends growing up that would hunt with compound bows, but the amount of pulleys and winches and like shit going on in that, I don't think it was an equivalent to a yew bow.
Yeah.
Longbow tension. Those are all there just so a kid can pull back and kill an animal.
Yeah, they're way easier. The stuff you see in movies and TV shows it's completely unrealistic most of the time. Seems like they had to basically train to be able to even pull back these longbows for the archers to shoot them in real battles. At least there's some realism here. The last line of the chapter, there was nothing the black-cloaked horseman could do that the people of Emmons Field could not handle together. And I just wrote, surely, in all caps, because...
Yeah, it doesn't go too well. These last lines of the chapters are actually turning out to be kind of funny as I'm reading through the book.
Yeah, I look forward to them. It was going to be the best Beltane ever.
I know, it's a very like short foreshadowing. We're foreshadowing the next chapter and the next chapter. Like, look at all the ways they were wrong. And the payoff is so quick.
And coincidentally, that's exactly how it works as we move to the next section of our podcast. Let's hear that next chapter summary.
Chapter 5, Winter Night. Rand and Tam arrive at home to find it undisturbed. After doing some chores and taking care of the livestock, Tam sets about securing the cottage. After taking the unusual step of locking the doors, Tam pulls a chest out from under his bed and reveals a heron-marked sword to Rand, who had never known of its existence. Rand wonders about his father's mysterious past as they sit down to take in their evening meal, when a knock comes at the door. Suddenly, it comes down with a great crash as monstrous tall creatures with horns and hooves carrying curved blades burst into the room. Tam cuts the first 2 down and sends Rand out the window to hide in the woods. After creeping around outside for a few moments, Rand sees Tam come crashing through a window, streaming towards the trees with several of the creatures in his wake. Rand follows them into the dark woods quietly before being surprised from behind by a wounded Tam, who names the creatures as trollocs. Rand returns to the home to gather supplies where he has an encounter with a trolloc, which ends in its death at the point of the heron's sword. Rand returns to Tam and the pair set off towards the safety of Emmons Field.
This is where it pops off. I'm just going to throw that out there. This is where the shit gets good.
Yeah.
Yeah, he starts to flex his prose more. I really like how the tension builds up as Tam and Rand return to the farm here. You know, they're going around checking things out at first. Tam seems like he really knows what he's doing. And then they sort of do these chores. And as they get tired and head in for the evening, really starts to kind of build up the tension here as Tam is going around locking things. He's pulling out his sword.
I like when he checks the well. Like he goes and he takes the water to the well and he like tastes it. I'm like, man, I would not think to do that at all. That seems like a soldier thing, right?
I was blown away by chapter 1. They're heading into Emmons Ferry. 2, 3, and 4. They're in Emmons Ferry.
Field.
All this shit happens. They head back. I would be like, okay, time for bed. But Tam's like, okay, cut 10,000 stumps of wood.
That's farm life, yeah.
It's time for choring, baby. And they do all these chores and then settling down for dinner. Did Tam eat anything? He just smoked his pipe.
Well, there's a whole sentence I remember where Mistress Alvear comes over and gives the town council a whole plate of food. There's like a whole description of different stuff on it.
Oh, that's right. And they all shut up.
But then he didn't check to see if his kid had anything to eat before coming back. As a parent, taking your kids around, like just making sure that they have lunch and stuff, it's just something you got to think about.
Those were different times.
I hope if my son is 19, he can fucking figure out his own lunch.
I liked this line right at the beginning. Tam and Rand were considered out of the ordinary as much for being two men living alone as for farming in the Westwood. Is that a...
Gay.
Yeah, is that pointing at how we don't take kindly to those folk around here?
I think so. Even if it's like a dude and his son. Okay, yeah, great.
I know.
Quote unquote son. Anybody watch the last season of White Lotus?
Yeah.
No, I did not.
It's like the dude and his nephew or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, he's not really... Well, spoilers. That was a very surprising scene, I will say that.
One thing I noticed when Rand is chopping firewood, it seems like he gets into it and then he kind of like zones out to the world around him. And I feel like that's kind of flame in the void, right? It's him putting that mental training to work.
Yes, I thought that too.
And also, he's farming tobacco and sheep on marginal forest land. What do they eat? Maybe there's a garden in here somewhere or something. I was kind of wondering, like, both very cash dependent crops to have.
I noted that too because it goes back to our discussion in the previous episode about whether these people are actually just subsistence farmers or if they're involved in more of a broad economy of trading and being able to acquire food and goods from other places, because they don't seem to go anywhere but the two rivers. But it says few farmers in the two rivers could make do without both wool and tobacco to sell when the merchants came. I mean, that pretty much says that they have to depend on this economy.
That's their specialty. And they probably have like root crops and everything.
Well, apparently he has pear brandy, but there's no mention of where that pear orchard is or where the distillery to make the brandy is on the property. But, whatever, we'll just gloss that over.
Let's add 3 more books to talk about the agriculture of the Wheel of Time world. As if we need more description.
As they are preparing for the evening, about to take in the stew and everything, and Tam gets out the heron blade, Rand gets to thinking about how he doesn't know a lot about his father's past and has these thoughts that, like, what? Was he a soldier or where did he get this sword? Tam mentions that the price for it was entirely too much.
I think you could say, like, he was a soldier and he got this sword, but it maybe cost too much.
I thought, like, the price was blood. I did get the feeling that later he starts talking about nightmares and things in his memories while he's sort of sick. Sounds like maybe in the past with the soldiering that he might have been doing. He probably has some PTSD or something like that. It's stuff that he's shut out of his head and doesn't want to talk about, which that rings pretty true.
Sounds like he's been through some traumatic shit. But then right below this, there's like several paragraphs where they're just kind of talking about Rand and Tam's reading spots as they're waiting for dinner to cook. And as someone who appreciates like a good cozy reading spot, this seems like pretty clutch. There's in front of the fire. They've got like everything that they want, the pipe and the tobacco and everything. You can lay on the floor by the stove and read your book. I like a good cozy scene. This is like the last cozy scene these guys are going to get for a little bit. So good for them.
What if the whole series was just this? Ah, man. I love this cozy spot. Oh, I got these furs. I'm going to go in town. Oh, I'm going to go into the inn. There's another cozy spot. There's probably a series like that somewhere.
It's like running a game in Wander Home instead of Dungeons and Dragons.
Cozy Core.
I was about to say that. Sorry to break up your cozy core fantasy, but
No, they're so cozy.
takes like 2 paragraphs. There's a knock at the door, and it says, "I don't think," he began, and the door burst open, pieces of the iron lock spinning across the floor. I like that simple descriptor of the iron lock spinning across the floor. That feels very visceral to me.
I think I probably could have written that better, but Robert Jordan did the best he could.
Yeah, exactly. We get the entrance of the trollocs here. They bust in the door.
Can I read this dramatically?
Yeah, do it.
A figure filled the doorway bigger than any man Rand had ever seen. A figure in black mail that hung to his knees with spikes at wrist and elbows and shoulder. One hand clutched a heavy scythe-like sword. The other hand was flung up before his eyes, as if to shield them from the light.
I like the opening descriptions of them. Did you guys notice that the trollocs are described as being different physically from each one to the other? Some of them have hooves, some of them don't. I don't know if all of them have horns, but at one point it says that some of them are beaked.
Like birds? Yeah, that seems crazy.
It does seem crazy.
The one that first comes in, though, it has like ram horns, and the way that those horns are described is the same way that they described the ram that was staring at him in the pen earlier. And I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it's something I caught.
I like it. Yeah, I think they're kind of like a combination of things that you see in other mostly high fantasy stuff, but they're a little unique and maybe slightly demonic / like, what are the hooved creatures in fantasy that I can't think of right now?
Satyrs, satyrs.
Satyrs, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
I've always said satyrs, and then I've realized that that's wrong, and I should say satyrs.
That's the way I think I've heard it in audiobook.
Yeah, that's one of those things you don't hear out loud.
I kind of like them as a good standard grunt evil creature that gets sent at people.
You need some base level soldiers that are like scary, but not too scary.
Yeah.
And I think they do a good job with this, with the trollocs.
Rand runs out of the house and ends up back in there later on. But when he comes back in, you find out that the trollocs, some of them can actually speak, sort of. Yeah, he gets introduced to that one named Narg, which we'll talk about. But the trollocs seems like they have some level of intelligence and even tries to trick Rand. So I didn't remember them that way, but I like that they're not just mindless.
They lose their personhood after this book.
Oh, really?
I mean, they just become way more anonymous after this because the scope gets much bigger.
Oh, yeah.
You're just frying thousands of them. Yeah, I feel like this may be one of the few named trollocs in the book, right?
Maybe the only one.
Okay, so Tam's fighting in the front door. They're all fight, ching, ching, ching. He runs out to the back. He looks out the window just as somebody's slamming in the door. So he jumps out the window, but now he sees his dad is getting attacked from both sides. But then he goes to like crawl through the barn and he freaks out because something falls on him. He thinks that something's attacking him and he fights back and it's a hoe. And I thought that was just very funny. Like,
He calls himself a Copland fool idiot. I also noted that there's this glass shattering as they break these windows and Tam bursts out and all that. And it seems it's a little asynchronous with how we think of like the Middle Ages. These farmers definitely would not be able to afford glass, but maybe that's just a thing that exists in Wheel of Time. But
it's in a Neil Stephenson book. He like deeply describes a glass window in like London in the 1700s at one point. I'm like, okay, that's now my like understanding of what a glass window would look like. Just like thick, gross for light to come in, but not to actually see through.
Speaking of the window, Tam bursts out of it, runs off, pretty brave and badass here. He gets all the trollocs chasing after him and just runs off straight into the woods and is like, Rand, seriously, get the fuck out of here.
I like that Rand keeps yelling, like, Dad, I'm over here. Hey, Dad, I'm over here in the woods. And Tam's just like calling the other direction. Oh, yes, Rand, I see you over there. And trying to run that way to get them away.
I'm going to run to the other woods.
I'm running in this direction, Father.
I did like the writing in general here. It was nice when Rand sees his father run off into the woods there, and then after a minute, he starts following. He just goes off into these dark woods, and the description of that is actually like, if you've ever been in a dark forest at night, there's no lights around, and it's just the darkest thing you can imagine, and there's branches and roots everywhere, and you really start to realize how dangerous it is to even walk normally. You have to creep around, or you're going to trip and get impaled on some kind of stick poking out somewhere or something like that. And then there's wild animals out hunting and stuff like that at night. Pretty scary thing on its own without the trollocs and all that. You guys ever been lost out in the woods at night?
Never been. super lost. Or here, I'll tell you, I've actually a funny story comes to mind. So a couple of years ago, I went to go stay with my friends who live near Astoria, Oregon, which is kind of in some wild country on the Oregon coast. And they live kind of up in the hills outside of town. We were hanging out and, drinking and doing some stuff. And then everyone was asleep, and me and my friend Jesse decided, he's like, hey, we was going to go walk in the woods. He has some dogs. So we're like, we're just going to walk the dogs to the woods. And he knew exactly where we were going. So he just like turns his flashlight off and starts walking. And I'm just trying to like follow him. And man, like it was crazy. I thought like we were just like out in the middle of the wilderness, thick brush, like, oh my God, there's like everywhere. And then we kind of get back eventually to the road again and walk back to his house. And then the next day, like in daylight, we go out there and we're just like, oh man, where were we? We were maybe 100 to 200 feet off the road, and then kind of like circled around in some trees and then came back. But to me, this seemed like this epic journey that we had been on in the night in the woods.
You ever been out like that, Ben?
I can't remember like being lost in the woods. I've been lost in cities, and I do quite a bit of hiking and camping and backpacking. And one thing that comes to mind is probably 15 or more years ago, we were backpacking, my dad, my brother, and I. It was up on Mount Jefferson, and it was at night, obviously, or it wouldn't be scary. And we just heard a boom, and we just hear dum, 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 dum. Something would roll by our tents, like a rock or something, and it just kept going on over and over again. At the time, it was like, that's a bear. But I think it was like a stag sharpening his horns on a stump or a tree. And he was just sending shit like going right by us. And that was the scariest backpacking moment I've had.
There's a good description in the book here at some point of Rand moving through the forest. I think maybe when he has Tam and he's dragging him, but he talks about how part of the trouble is just that you keep thinking that when you step forward, you're not sure where your foot's going to go. And you think that maybe there's a spot where it's going to land and it's just slightly different because there's a root or a rock there or some kind of elevation, nothing's level. And just the uncertainty of everything going on around you is, it's hard to deal with, and it's really scary. What else happens in this chapter? Rand goes back to the house.
Yeah, he goes to find his sheep first, and they're all dead. And I did kind of like that moment. He gets in there first, like he's exploring, and they clearly have fucked up the house, and there's vile smears defiling the walls, which is like, what is that? Is that poop?
Is that poop?
Is that what the guys did on January 6th? What else could that be? And then, yeah, Narg, others go away. Narg stay. Narg smart. I like that.
Yeah, Narg is he's a fun 30-second character. This is good.
But it does kind of introduce like the mirror draw or the fade or whatever wants the boys, which is interesting.
And Rand knows what that is, apparently. I was like, okay, you got to catch me up here with some exposition, Rand. What's a mirror draw? Oh, it's a fade.
Well, cool. That doesn't tell me anything. Great. Thank you.
You just assume that that's what the Dark Rider is. But in his head, like, they're 20 feet tall and they have eyes made of fire and they ride around on shadows, which maybe the riding around on shadows thing makes sense here because the weird description of the horse. I did like after Rand sort of accidentally kills Narg by lifting up his sword as it charges at him. He's going around the house and he's grabbing what supplies are left. And he thinks about things in his head that are kind of mundane, where he's talking about how the smell, they're never going to be able to get it out. He doesn't know if they'll even be able to clean up the house. Thinking about just normal life things mixed in with this high stakes, we're about to die situation.
He wipes the sword with the rag, and it's, that rag was actually Tam's shirt this morning, but it's been ripped up now. And goes to find herbs, and they're in a dark, muddy-looking pile on the floor.
That all rings pretty true to me. Like sometimes when you're in a dangerous situation, your mind does actually drift into things. You go down these roads of thinking for a second, and you're like, why am I thinking about this at all? This doesn't matter, and none of this will matter at all if I don't live through this.
Yeah, I was in a car accident a few years ago, and I was like spun the wrong way on the middle of the road, and I was trying to just turn my podcast off because I knew I wanted to still listen to that, so I just needed to pause it. It was just like my brain being like, no, just do this one stupid thing instead of the smart thing at the moment.
I hope someone gets that experience with us talking. I hope someone gets in a car accident.
Yeah. If you're in a car accident right now, I'm sorry. It's not a fun experience.
What was Ben Bowie about to say?
No.
I'll never find out.
And if Rodrigo from the Critical Hit podcast is listening to this, I was listening to your podcast when I got in a car accident. So there you go, bud.
This is on you, Rodrigo.
I had the same note about that. this chapter about trauma, things that happened in your mind when you're in a fight or flight moment.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, did I leave the oven on? Or just something like that.
I did want to just note also, we talked a little bit about like Lan's cloak and the unmoving clothing of the Dark Rider and these sort of descriptions of things that sound like they're magical. Rand uses the heron-marked blade to chop up the cart so that he can create a makeshift stretcher for Tam so he can pull him through the woods. And as he uses the sword, he notes that it should have dulled it instantly chopping this wood, but he examines the blade afterwards and it's completely as sharp as it ever was. And that just sounds like there's something going on with this sword that probably we will find out more about later.
Yep. He goes to get Tam out of the woods, and Tam is clearly more fucked up, which was interesting, right? Like, he was not that hurt when obviously he was able to sneak up on Rand and like hold his mouth, but now he's...
Yeah, Rand even says that he had seen Tam get wounds worse than that just working the farm and just go on working without even treating it. And he all of a sudden has a fever and is basically unconscious, coming in and out of consciousness and then saying strange things intermittently.
Closing out this chapter, they would be safe once they had reached the village and Nynaeve would cure Tam. He just had to get them there.
Surely.
Nice little hopeful line from our buddy Rand.
And with that, let's get into the next chapter. Chapter 6, The Westwood. A feverish Tam falls in and out of consciousness as Rand pulls him on a makeshift stretcher along the quarry road towards Emmons Field. Tam mutters about what seemed to be events of his past with talk of trollocs, the instigation of a war by a man named Layman, the Green Man, and the Tree of Life. The dark-clothed rider appears at the head of a small army of trollocs. Rand is able to hide among the trees until they pass, feeling the same projection of hate towards him that he felt earlier that day. As they resume the trek back into town, Tam talks of finding a baby on a distant battlefield, unwittingly revealing that neither he nor his wife Carrie are related to Rand by blood. So what did you guys think?
During all of this, he is 100% convinced that everything in Emmons Field is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And that if he just gets to town, everything is going to be cool. But like, well, I didn't notice any fortifications on that town there, buddy.
Most of this chapter is filled with Rand dragging Tam through the woods as Tam goes in and out of consciousness.
It's like, each, ooh, ooh.
Is that a root? Oh, is that another root?
Tam is he's talking about mostly memories in his dreams here, in his fever dreams. We get the first mention, I believe, of Rand's mother's name, which is Carrie. And he says, "You're still lovely, Carrie. Still lovely as a girl." Which I guess says that Tam and Carrie knew each other since they were children, I assume, because that would be weird if he was an adult. I like this line that it says here, though. He could not waste time worrying over problems he could do nothing about. That's a very simple thing. Everyone has probably thought that before, but that's just a good thing to always think about when, you get caught up in your anxieties about stuff going on, no matter what, even if the worry has legitimacy behind you worrying about it. Just the fact that you're sitting there thinking about it is not doing anything to help, and it's a waste of time and effort and emotional sapping going on there that it's just not necessary. Human brains suck.
There's an interesting moment as well when he like puts on Tam's sword. It makes him feel odd. And then like he kind of goes back and forth in his brain over the next couple paragraphs of like, oh yes, I am a hero. It's fine. It's just a big knife, whatever. I can wield the sword. But then like, no, I can't wield this sword because that trolloc would have demolished me if I hadn't accidentally killed him. He kind of keeps going back and forth. I think this is more a person kind of dealing with some real shit in their head, trying to figure it out, like going back and forth. And he's like, I'm not a hero. Why are my teeth chattering and all that stuff?
He basically says, if I could have my way, I would just get through this and then never have anything crazy happen to me again. He's already feeling like he's got the adventuring bug out of his system just from this short little dose of reality that he's getting here. I did like how it talks about how his father had always seemed indestructible, which I think that's something that a lot of kids have happen to them at some point when they see something happen to their parents, whether it's getting sick or injured in a car accident or something like that. And just seeing that happen in front of you, experiencing it is a rude awakening for a lot of people to the reality that your parents are going to die and so are you. It sort of breaks a spell of fantasy that you're born into, at least in today's modern society with all of our comforts.
Yeah, distinctly remember, I don't even know how old I was because it was like some old house before I was even like 4 or 5 years old or something. But like seeing my dad who was clipping a rose bush or something and like cut his hand really bad showed me like, oh man, my dad can bleed. Oh my God. The mind blowing facts a little kid can learn. And that's, stuck with me through all the years. Yeah, and it's also the interesting choice, I think, He gets to the road, because I know he's like, okay, I gotta follow the road, but I can't be on the road. So instead he goes near the road. Living in the Pacific Northwest, I can tell you the worst place, the hardest forest you're ever going to find to go through is about 100 feet off of a road, because it's just like the undergrowth has gone crazy. You really need to either get further in or just be on the goddamn road.
Every 5 steps you take, you're running into a new wall of spider webs that you have to push through or something like that. If there's moisture on the plant life, you're getting soaked because you have to push through it all.
Spiderwebs, blackberry bushes, ferns. But we're in also the most undergrowth heavy place on perhaps the earth. So
we do live in a rainforest, yeah.
Tam says some things here that we probably can't dive too deep into, or at least Ben can't say too much because he'll know more than I know, and Tyler probably does too. But trying not to drop too many spoilers, he talks about, I believe, trollocs coming over the dragon wall like a flood and wash the land with blood. How many died for layman's sin?
he's not talking about trollocs.
All right. He says they called them savages. The fools could be swept aside like rubbish. How many battles lost? How many cities burned before they faced the truth, before the nations stood together against them? Doesn't say what it is, so I guess we won't get into that, but it does sound like he was involved in a pretty crazy battle back in the day. He sort of hints at this war being started by a guy named Layman. We don't know who that is either, but he says the field at Marith carpeted with the dead. No sound but the cries of ravens and the buzzing of flies. The topless towers of Carrion burning in the night like torches. All the way to the shining walls they burned and slew before they were turned back. All the way to... And it cuts off. It's just kind of listing off names, and it sounds like a pretty sick battle. I like all that, but I don't know what it means. What else does he say here?
So battles are always hot, even in the snow. Sweat, heat, blood heat. Only death is cool. Slope of the mountain. Only place didn't stink of death. Had to get away from the smell of it, sight of it. Heard a baby cry. Their women fight alongside the men, sometimes. But why had they let her come? I don't. Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered the child with her cloak, but the wind, blown the cloak away. Child blew with the cold. Should have been dead too, crying there, crying in the snow. I couldn't just leave a child, or no children of her own. Always knew you wanted children. I knew you'd take it to your heart, Kari. Yes, lass. Rand is a good name. A good name.
Robert Jordan clearly made the decision there to fully reveal that Rand is not the child of him and Carrie.
If you haven't figured it out yet, Rand is different. If you haven't figured it out by the fact that he doesn't look like his dad, and his hair is different, and he's taller, and his eyes are different, he's different.
Some authors, some books would have dragged out that mystery with much less of a hint there for like an entire book or two, or more than that. But no, he's just spelling it out there, which is good. I like to get some lore drop.
They got to get past that real quick.
You got a little bit of a mystery, and then that mystery is resolved. And I kind of respect that, because we got a lot of pages left in this book, and we need to know what's going on.
I did like he's imagining what's going on back in town as they're heading back. He's talking about what would be happening on winter's night in Emmons Field. And it sounds exactly like this musical we've been sort of describing. He's like, in his mind, he pictured Emmons Field, shutters thrown back, and the houses lit for winter night. People shouting greetings as they pass back and forth on their visits. Fiddles filling the streets with James Volley or Heron on the Wing. Harold Lewin would have had one too many brandies and started singing The Wind in the Barley in a voice like a bullfrog. He always did, until his wife managed to shush him.
I can't believe it's just us one more time till bell time. Yes, we can't believe it's just one more night till bell time.
Exactly.
Winter night, winter night, winter night. Yeah, I'm just clearly picturing the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Yeah, we should probably wrap up here real quick.
Yeah, just at the end. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. He's my father. It was just a fever dream. Light. Who am I? You could do a whole nother solo right there. We've come up with now, like, I think 5 or 6 musical acts for just the first 6 chapters.
I'm making notes for our cues.
Oh, good. I did like that line, though. That's good writing there. It just sounds very real that after hearing that, you would just be denying it. Like, no, he's my dad. He's my dad. He's just having a bad dream. Surely.
No, that's my dad.
Guys, we did it. 3 chapters.
Hell yeah.
Boom.
I enjoyed these chapters overall quite a bit, and it makes me excited because from what I remember, things start to go pretty heavily into like nonstop action for a while here. And I don't just mean like fighting and killing and stuff like that, but more high stakes things happening than just talking about the people of Emmons Field and the spring pole.
This gets to be a road trip story, which is really my favorite type of story.
Yeah, I enjoy a good road trip. I also enjoy a good whimsical, crazy city quite a bit. That's another one of my favorite things. We're just the endless feeling city. But I hope we get some time in some of these books where we settle into that kind of story, because it feels like when you're writing that long of an epic series, you sort of stray into different subgenres in your different books. I hope. We'll see.
Yep. There's definitely going to be some urban. There's going to be some rural. There's going to be some movement. There's going to be some standstill.
Going to be some musical.
I would say we got some suburban.
Ooh, suburban. We get suburban where like Rand has settled down in the suburbs with Egwene and they have a whole family for a while, and it just talks about them taking their kids to school and shit.
Yeah, that's the weird 2 books where it's really a lot about private school tuition.
Oh my God, yeah. These taxes are killing me.
And HOA fees, the reckoning of the lawn, and the straightening of the garbage bins. Those are the worst 2 books in this series, in my opinion.
The silencing of the fireworks.
The summoning of the noise complaint.
I can't wait to get there. Well, that brings us to the close of another episode of the Bridge Burners Book Club. We would love it if you follow us on Instagram at Bridge Burners Book Club, on Twitter at Bridge Burners BC, and find us on YouTube at Bridge Burners Book Club, where we will be posting full episodes, clips, and polls going forward. If you would like to write in, shoot us an email at bridgeburnersbc@gmail.com with any comments, questions, or contentions, and maybe we'll read them on air. You can also join our Discord with the link in the episode description to join in discussions, ask us questions, or post your best memes. It really helps if you give us a rating on Apple and Google Podcasts, so please consider helping the show grow. I'm the Sean Chan, and for my co-hosts, Ben Bowie and Tyler the Creator, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.